Exposed, 10 spine-chilling encounters with sinister feral people in Appalachia's haunted shadows. Jess peeked through the murky glass of the gas station as the sun descended behind the Appalachians, stretching shadows like fingers across the pavement. This night was different. The familiar chirp of crickets now sounded like a death knell. Murmurs of the feral ones crept into her mind, those wild figures of the woods, lost souls twisted by hunger and despair. It was as if the hollers themselves were heaving with ancient secrets, and she was the lone witness to their dark purpose. The gas station was a lifeline to the town, where everyone knew everyone, and gossip flowed faster than the gas. But each curve of the road felt more like a noose tightening around her neck. The wind howled through the trees, carrying unsettling noises. It was just the wind, she told herself. But the way it whispered her name made her shudder. She strained her ears, and there it was, a low growl echoing deep within the woods following the flurry of rustling leaves. Something was watching. Panic raced her heart. Kyle was at home, but would he hear the call of the wild too? Darkness engulfed the surroundings, and the headlights of passing cars became fleeting beacons of normalcy in a growing nightmare. Jess fidgeted behind the counter, hoping to find solace in the mundane job of ringing up snacks and drinks, but dread hung heavily in the air. With every tick of the clock, her resolve began to crack. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jess pressed a hand to her temple, trying to shake away the mounting realization that the woods weren't just shadows but a presence. On her way home the night before, she'd nearly run into something, a glimpse of eyes catching the light, wide and hungry, reflecting an instinct that chilled her bones. It was always rumored that the feral ones gathered in the underbrush, waiting, watching, but she had brushed it off then. But now it was happening to Kyle. He slipped out during the darkest hours, saying he'd been called to the forest. Each time he returned, something about him shifted. The spark was fading. She was chasing him into dark corners, night after night, as he wandered from her, like a moth drawn to a flame. Everything in her screamed for him, a protective instinct blooming into a primal fear. Generations of her people had thrived in these mountains, but they had never warned about what could arise from the shadows. The sheriff's dismissive wave echoed in her mind, "Don't go stirring the pot with foolish myths, Jess." But something was brewing. She stumbled home, mind racing with wild thoughts. The light from her porch flickered ominously, and in that moment, she felt the shadows settle heavier around her. When she turned, a form materialized from the trees, unsettling and distorted. Heart racing, she edged backward. But as the wind shrieked through the leaves, she knew there was no escaping the grasp of fear. And as she turned to run, a glimmer of truth struck her like a bolt. Was it the wild creatures lurking in the woods she should fear, or something far more sinister in the hearts of her neighbors? Her breath tangled in her throat, Jake's loud voice somewhere in the distance drowned by the dread nesting within. This was only the beginning, but darkness loomed. Jess stumbled back, heart thundering like a drum in her ears. The figure moved with a grotesque fluidity, emerging from the dark like a nightmare sprung to life. She couldn't make out its features, just the silhouette that seemed both human and not, limbs unnaturally elongated, sharp and jagged. Panic clutched at her throat, making breathing a chore. "Hello?" she whimpered, voice trembling, barely above a whisper. The figure halted, cocking its head as if considering her. The woods fell silent, and for a moment, all she could hear was the rush of her own blood. Then a growl, deep and primal, shattered the stillness. Jess darted sideways, eyes wide, searching for an escape. The fear coursing through her was electric, urging her to run even as her feet felt rooted to the ground. In that instant, she saw it, 3 gleaming eyes behind the first figure, peering from the shadows where the trees clustered thick. They seemed to pulse with malice, an echo of the stories whispered in frightened tones around campfires or under breath in the gas station. These were not just locals wandering too far into the woods, these were the feral ones. As the initial figure lunged, Jess turned and sprinted down the porch steps, heart racing as shrieks and howls erupted from the depths of the forest. She dashed across the yard, feeling the damp grass under her bare feet. Just make it inside, she thought, a mantra of survival. She burst through the front door, slamming it shut behind her. Adrenaline surged as she locked the door, chest heaving. But that fleeting safety felt hollow. The shadows inside the house crept closer. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind against the glass made her jump. Jess! A voice echoed from the dark living room. Kyle! Relief washed over her, but it was tinged with dread. His voice was thick, a ghost of the man she loved. She rushed toward him, grasping his shoulders. What's wrong? You can't go back there. I saw them. His eyes were unfocused, distant, almost wild. I have to, Jess. They're calling me. We need to go. Go? Where? Are you even listening? They're out there. Panic clawed at her, but he shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a dream that gripped him tight. They need us, he murmured, almost dreamlike. It's our fate. A blinding shiver darted down her spine. This wasn't Kyle. It was something far darker that wore his skin. What do you mean? Her voice cracked. What's your fate? Out of nowhere, the lights flickered before extinguishing completely. A blanket of darkness enveloped them both, and Jess felt the first creeping dread within the room. The chill crept in as if a specter had stepped through the walls, tightening around her throat. Kyle's voice echoed from the dark, close yet distant. She fumbled for her phone, the glow illuminating his face, temples slick with sweat. Please, we need to leave now. As the pale light revealed something more, Jess gasped, choking on fear. His eyes weren't just vacant, they sparked with an inexplicable hunger, wild and ravenous. And then she heard it, scratching at the windows, breathless growls seeping through the walls, an insatiable chorus of voices calling for him, for her, for all that would become prey. The faces of the feral ones danced in her mind. Memories of those who vanished, whispers of the forest. Would she become another name lost to the night? The shadows twisted dangerously, pressing closer, suffocating the already fragile air. In that moment of paralyzing terror, a choice loomed before her. Would she fight for Kyle's soul? Or surrender to the wild? With a scream swelling in her throat, Jess turned towards the door, ready to defy the darkness. But as she reached desperately for the doorknob, she felt a hand cold and clammy grip her wrist. Stay with us, Kyle whispered, and in his eyes, Jess saw the feral ones behind him, hungry, waiting. What happened next, she wouldn't know until it was too late. The grip on her wrist tightened, a vice of ice that threatened to pull her into a void darker than the night itself. Jess's heart raced as she felt the power of whatever was controlling Kyle, dismissing the man she loved in a brutal exchange for something monstrous. She stumbled backward, yanking her arm free, panic igniting a desperate urge to flee. Don't leave me. His voice warped into a haunting echo, reverberating off the walls like a forgotten tune. It clawed at her mind, begging for sympathy while a deep growl escaped the shadows, yet again a chorus joining the feral ones, an invitation to join them or be devoured. She shoved the feeling of dread deep within, fighting the urge to believe those eyes. Kyle, fight it. You're stronger than this. The darkness pulsed around them, thickening with every second she hesitated. The lights remained off, and the glow from her phone felt like a flicker against an encroaching storm. She turned to the nearest window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to glimpse the outside world. The black mass that was the forest loomed menacingly, the air vibrating with malignant energy. And there they were. Flickers of movement, barely perceptible through the mist. Jess's breath caught. The feral ones were there, moving just beyond the tree line, their grotesque silhouettes merging into the shadows. They beckoned with twisted fingers as they circled, taunting her, whispering promises of safety from the cursed world inside. "No!" she shouted, desperation fueling her. She had endured enough horror tonight, and the idea of succumbing to it felt like betrayal. Kyle's body quivered, a shadow of despair flitting across his face as he wrestled with whatever thing was clawing its way into him. "You shouldn't fight. Embrace it." The whisper came, a sultry hiss from Kyle's lips, tinged with both anguish and a seductive pull. "They're waiting for us. They know what you truly fear, what you crave." Jess shook her head violently. "No. You're in there. I know it. You need to fight." But the shadows gathered, thickening into a more substantial form behind Kyle. Tendrils of darkness licked the air, reaching for her, an ethereal smog creeping perilously close. Jess saw a shimmer of hope. If she could just get to the back door, she might escape, find help, anything but this. Rushing past Kyle, she sprinted down the narrow hallway, the scratching at the windows ramping up, turning rhythmic like a clock ticking down to zero. She flung open the kitchen door and bolted for the back entrance, fingers fumbling to unlock the deadbolt. The hair on her arms prickled as she could almost hear their whispers urging her to stay. Suddenly, a primal roar erupted behind her. She felt it vibrate through her bones, turning her blood cold. "Jess, you can't leave." Kyle's voice came again, now almost twisted, layered with something venomous and desperate. Just as she managed to disengage the lock, the door flew open with a violent force. The wind howled like a banshee, freezing her to the spot. Shadows poured into the kitchen, filling the space with bodies twisted and deformed, the feral ones emerging as they crossed the threshold. With a surge of energy fueled by fright, she swung around, breath hitching, eyes scanning for escape. She had to make a choice: run into the unforgiving wilderness or stay and fight for Kyle, for the man she loved. But the horrors reflected in those three vicious eyes wouldn't let her go untouched. The feral ones advanced, moving closer, seamlessly blending with the horrific forms of the darkness swirling around. Jess felt the edge of sanity fraying as the growls morphed into shaping words, beckoning her into submission, and then, deep within the chaos, she spotted a glimmer of light breaking through the darkness. "Time to choose." The shadows clamored, their voices melding into one chilling resonance. "Fate awaits." Jess hesitated just one breath too long. What prisoners of darkness await in the woods beyond the door? Would she step into the light or become part of the darkness? The wind whipped around her, carrying the stench of decay and despair. Jess felt the swell of fear tightening her throat as the shadows advanced, their movement synchronized like predator and prey dancing on the edge of a deadly game. She staggered back, pulse pounding in her ears, urging her to move. With nothing but the light from her phone pushing back the darkness, it was a fragile fight. She shot a glance over her shoulder, desperately looking for Kyle, but he stood frozen, eyes wide and unrecognizable. The flickering glow reflected the breach of humanity within him, a brief flash of her Kyle swallowed by the void. As the feral ones closed in, Jess lunged forward, fueled by instinct and desperation. Her feet pounded against the worn wooden floor, the sound muted by the oppressive silence that engulfed the house. She hardly registered the grotesque forms of the feral ones as they slithered closer, their whispers rising like the wind. "You could join us," they hissed, voices soft yet insistent, wrapping around her like smoke. But then, a pulse of brightness flickered at the back of her mind. The light. Whatever she had seen outside could offer hope. Pumping adrenaline pushed her forward as Jess hurled herself toward the open back door, the threshold of salvation. She burst into the night, breath stolen away by the chill that gripped her skin, yet that same air felt alive with wild possibility. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, shrouded in shadow. Vines crawled up their trunks like grasping hands. For a moment, she stood still, chest heaving, drawing in the cool air, her muscles coiled and ready to flee. But the sound of hell broke loose behind her. A moan that sent icy shards through her veins. "Jess! Come back!" Kyle's voice echoed from within the house, now a hybrid of his and something darker. Ignoring the call, she sprinted into the hollow of the woods, the bark from the trees scratching like nails as she pushed through, adrenaline making her blind to danger. Each step took her deeper, away from the malevolence she had just escaped, but also into a darkness that pulsed with its own heartbeat. Was it her imagination or were the whispers around her growing louder? Feral ones followed, shadows blending seamlessly with the unforgiving night. The growls warped into a chilling symphony, a language unfathomable yet unsettlingly familiar. "Join us, Jess," they seduced, their voices now rich with silk and terror. "You always wanted to know," she stumbled, trying to shut off the sound, but it seeped into her mind, caressing her thoughts, igniting a dangerous curiosity. Finding her footing, she veered off the path, deciding to circle back toward the house instead of running deeper into the unknown. There was too much at stake. Kyle. If there was any chance to reach him, to save him, she had to try. She felt a flicker of hope, a desperate belief that somehow, she could pull him back from the brink. As she edged closer to the clearing, faint moonlight cut through the dense canopy, illuminating the ground dotted with jagged rocks and twisted roots. Suddenly, she froze. A figure stood in the clearing, one of the feral ones, enormous and now eerily familiar. Its gaze was hungry, sizing her up with an intelligence that sent her heart racing anew. "You can't hide from them, Jess. The call is stronger than any bond you think you share," it crooned, grinning with needle-like teeth. She could feel the boundary between reality and nightmare collapsing, the ground beneath her slipping. It was then that Jess realized some truths are meant to be buried deep. A voice, an emblem of warmth, brought forth a chilling revelation: surrendering meant losing Kyle forever. The figure stepped closer, and in the back of her mind, the thought twisted like a knife: what if Kyle was already lost, trapped behind the veil of darkness? Fear gripped her tightly as the shadows thickened, enveloping her in uncertainty. Every instinct screamed to run. But where? As the feral one loomed above her, Jess took a deep breath, ready to fight, heart racing, standing at the brink of her own desperation. What would happen next? Would she succumb to the quiet, dark whispers, or was there a flicker of light to guide her way? The creature's form warped as it slipped through the shadows, its elongated limbs twisting unnaturally. Jess's mind screamed to brandish a weapon, anything to defend herself. But panic froze her body, rendering her powerless. "Join us," it hissed again, closer now, the air thick with its rancid breath. "You know you want to know." She shook her head violently, trying to dispel the sensuous allure of its words. "Get away from me," she shouted, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. At that moment, the moon broke free from the clouds, casting an eerie glow over the clearing. It illuminated the feral one's features: pallid skin stretched taut over bone, eyes dark as the abyss, filled with insatiable hunger. Each heartbeat echoed like a warning drum, echoing through the silence, urging her to regain control before it was too late. Behind her, the whispers erupted into frenetic chatter, drowning out her thoughts. Feral ones spilled into the clearing, moving with a fluidity that sent ripples of dread down her spine. They encircled her, the darkness thickening, the shadows stretching indiscriminately towards her. Jess's breath hitched, and she took a hesitant step back, instinctively retreating toward the twisted roots at the edge, one foot tangling on the unnatural foliage, and then came the distant sound. A heartbeat, a deep, drumming pulse that felt like a chant calling her name. "Kyle," she whispered, her heart aching for him, as if tethered by an invisible thread. "Come to us, Jess. You needn't fear this freedom." The feral one stepped closer, low and conspiratorial. "Your world is not the only one to be embraced. They wait, just beneath the surface." She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to breathe, to resist their call. With one swift, desperate motion, she turned and sprinted back, deeper into the tangled mass of the night. More feral ones erupted from between the trees, their eyes glimmering like stars in the deep void of night, rushing to cut off her escape. Their whispers became desperate pleas, rising in volume, merging into a cacophony that made her head pound. "Join us, you'll never suffer again." Each step felt heavier than the last as she barreled through the underbrush, twigs snapping like bones beneath her feet. The fog of despair thickened around her, pushing her toward surrender. But with the sound of her pounding heart, she could still hear Kyle. Somewhere amid the chaos, his voice emerged, distant yet familiar. She clung to it, pushing through the heaviness. "Jess." A different tone now. Strained yet urgent. "Kyle." She screamed, hope blossoming bright amidst the chaos, cutting through the shadows. She would find him. She had to, but as the clearing opened up, a familiar sight made her blood run cold. The house stood before her, a dark silhouette against the sky, but it felt different. Ominous. It loomed like a grave marker of memories best left buried. The door stood ajar, and the feral ones hesitated at the threshold, whispering, shifting, as if the house commanded their loyalty. Without pause, Jess charged forward, stepping inside the creaking wood, the smell of damp earth engulfing her. Dim light flickered from deep within, a pulse inviting her to explore. Jess, his voice, weaker now, trickled from the shadows. She strained to hear, moving cautiously. Shadowy figures flickered across the walls, hers, his, and every other reflection twisted into grotesque forms of what they used to be. They danced, taunting her from the corners of her mind. "Don't listen to them." Kyle's voice was stronger, breaking through the veil, a lifeline in the dark. "Jess, I'm right here." With renewed determination, she turned toward the sound, everything around her merging into one chaotic horror. Would she find him, or would the feral ones claim another sacrifice? As Jess reached the staircase, the air vibrated with a sinister energy. The house responded, creaking ominously beneath her feet, shadows bending and twisting at their own will. The urge to flee was overpowering, yet Kyle's cry anchored her, but she hesitated. What would she find at the top? Would it be him? Or was she racing toward her doom? The question echoed in her mind like a sinister lullaby, wrapping around her throat. Just then, she glimpsed something moving in the corner of her eye, a flash of movement darting beyond the threshold of a room. Jess took a step forward, heart pounding. Was it Kyle, or another feral one? In uncertainty, she pressed onward, the darkness consuming her, and as the shadows flickered, she felt the cursed presence embracing her. What awaited her on the other side of fear? Would Kyle be there waiting, or would she uncover a truth more terrifying than she could ever imagine? Jess stepped into the hallway, the air thickening, tightening around her like a noose. Flickering shadows taunted her from every angle, their whispers slithering through her ears like insects. "Jess." The voice beckoned again, stirring her resolve, edging just beyond the reach of her sight. "Kyle." She cried out, her voice rebounding off the walls and returning to her, stripped of strength. She hesitated, catching her breath, dread bubbling in the pit of her stomach like boiling liquid. The familiar old staircase caught her gaze, spiraling upward, its wood weathered and cracked, as if alive and breathing. Slowly, Jess ascended the steps, each creak echoing with her mounting terror. The darkness loomed heavier up here, almost tangible, like it threatened to engulf her completely. "I'm coming. Just hold on." But even her own words rang hollow in the silence. Squeezed out of the house. At the top, the hall divided into two rooms, one to the left, one to the right. The left door stood slightly ajar, a dim light flickering within, pulsating like a heartbeat. The right door was completely closed, shadows masked the outline, whispering sinister secrets. What awaited her in each was a gamble of fate. "Jess!" Kyle shouted again, this time with urgency. He was near, close enough for her to feel his presence, a warmth among the cold encroachment of the feral ones. She couldn't go wrong now, he needed her. She flung open the left door, crashing against the wall. The room was filled with a putrid stench, the air stale and thick. The light flickered, revealing piles of bones strewn across the floor, matted with dark, clotted blood. Horror gripped her heart, and she stumbled back, breath hitching in her throat. It had been a trap. Jess from somewhere deep in the corner, Kyle's voice was faint, choked. Help! Panic surged through her veins. Where are you? She shouted, urgency fueling her steps back into the hall. She turned toward the right door, mind whirling, tapping into her last reserves of courage. Gripping the handle, she whipped it open. The room was dark, nearly pitch black, and the air shimmered with an uneasy electric charge. The shadows swayed and twisted. Prey or predator? A low growl reverberated in her ears. She couldn't tell if she stepped onto the threshold of salvation or into deeper peril. A figure materialized in the gloom. Kyle. His form flickered in the dimness, trapped between shadows. Jess. He lunged forward, and instinctively, she reached for him. The moment their hands touched, a shock rippled through her, blinding in its intensity. She was yanked back forcefully, tearing her hand from his grasp. No! She screamed. Then, the feral ones poured in, their bodies melding into the darkness, mouths twisted into grotesque smiles. They surged forward, pulling her back, slithering against her flesh, their rancid breath washing over her like a wave of decay. She felt the pull of their whispers, the seductive voice of the feral one all over again. Join us, Jess. Be free. Dread clawed at her throat as she fought against the tide, tearing toward Kyle once more. Fight it! She screamed over the rising chorus of demands echoing in her head. You have to fight. His eyes met hers, simultaneously frantic yet glazed over, something foreign lurking within. Jess, I can't. He was trapped, lost in their grip, the shadows closing in around him like chains. She couldn't let them take him. Not now. Summoning every ounce of will, Jess lunged forward, unwilling to let fate's cruel hand win. As she clasped Kyle's wrist again, a blinding white light erupted, pushing the darkness back. The feral ones hissed, their form morphing, retreating, thrashing against the wall of light as it held them at bay, but just as quickly, the light began to fade, their sinister laughter creeping back in, and fresh shadows creeping through where the light once shone. Jess felt her power waning, uncertainty gnawing at her once again. Stay with me, Kyle. She shouted, pulling him closer against the tide of shadows still grasping for him. What did she have to do to save him from their clutches? In that moment, a realization struck harder than the fear swarming around her. They weren't only after Kyle, they were after both of them. Would she succumb to their allure too? Or would she find the strength to pull both of them back from the brink? As the shadows reached out hungrily, clawing at her skin, their whispers echoed with twisted promises. Jess held Kyle tight, the choice looming before them both. What will you choose, Jess? Freedom might be closer than you think. The darkness craved them, a ravenous beast, and Jess could feel its hunger as it gnawed at her resolve. She locked eyes with Kyle, desperation coursing between them like electricity. We can do this! She shouted, but her voice was swallowed by the swirling chaos. Her heart raced, a drum of panic echoing in the tight confines of the room. The shadows twisted and writhed, their sinister laughter clawing at her sanity. Jess, join us, they cooed, their voices melted together, sickly sweet and hypnotic. Release your fear. Embrace the night. Get out of his head. Jess screamed, wrenching Kyle's arm as she felt the darkness begin to seep into her own mind. Memories flickered, childhood games, warm summer nights, Kyle's laughter echoing in their backyard. She couldn't let all of that fade away. No, stay strong. She whispered through clenched teeth, feeling the edges of her own soul beginning to fray. They needed a plan, they needed to fight. Jess took a deep breath, grounding herself in the present. Kyle. Listen to me. Her voice steadied as the shadows crept closer. You are stronger than them. Fight. His expression shifted, caught in a struggle between the real world and the eerie grasp of the feral ones. For a split second, clarity broke through the fog in his eyes. Jess. He gasped, his voice hoarse. I'm trying. The shadows recoiled momentarily, but Jess knew they would soon regroup, and they had to act fast. She focused on the shimmering light that had erupted before, hoping it wasn't completely extinguished. "Focus," she urged, squeezing his wrist harder. "Remember us. Fight back." A low growl rumbled beneath them, and the ground trembled as the feral ones circled them, their grotesque visages rippling in and out of view. "This is futile," one hissed with a voice like gravel. "You belong to us, you cannot escape." Jess felt it again, a cold tendril of doubt creeping up her spine. What if they were right? What if freedom was in surrender? Her mind flashed with chilling images of a life devoid of struggle, devoid of pain. But those thoughts only fueled her determination. "No!" she shouted, and in that moment, she let go of her fear, transforming it into fury. A wellspring of strength erupted inside her, and with a roar, she directed it toward Kyle, their hands gripping tighter, pulsing with newfound energy. The room erupted in a blinding light, full of vibrant colors, pushing backward the creeping shadows. The feral ones shrieked, their grotesque forms flickering under the illumination. They staggered, losing their composure, the whispers shifting to cries of anger and desperation. "Run!" Jess commanded, seizing Kyle's wrist, pulling him toward the door. But as they attempted to flee, the ground shook violently beneath them, swallowing the light. The walls seemed to bend and twist, creating a new passage behind them. "Jess, what is happening?" Kyle yelled, panic lacing his voice. "This way." She tugged him toward the ever-darkening hallway, knowing they had to keep moving or be consumed. The shadows rallied like a storm, shrieking and surging forward. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light erupted from behind them, and Jess turned, eyes wide with terror. The feral ones were regrouping, their forms solidifying, menacing. "You cannot run forever," they cried, their voices merging into an ominous chant. Dread pooled in Jess' stomach, escape seemed impossible. "Just keep moving," she urged, racing toward an open door at the end of the hallway. As they reached it, the shadows clawed at their heels, rasping breaths chilling the air. Jess threw herself through the doorway, dragging Kyle behind her, just as a torrent of darkness rushed in, slamming against the door with a terrifying roar. But beyond that door, darkness loomed again, a new room engulfed in an unsettling silence, the air thick and oppressive. In the middle stood a mirror, its surface reflecting only the shadows of their fears. "Where are we?" Kyle breathed, taking a step back. Jess tightened her grip on his hand. "Only one way to find out," she whispered, staring into the abyss. Swallowed by uncertainty, she felt the shadows creep closer, their laughter echoing in the void. What awaited them in the reflection, or was it a trap laid out by the feral ones? Jess could only guess. But one thing was clear, they were far from safe. "Step closer, Jess. Let us show you the truth," the shadows hissed. As she felt the darkness tightening around them, a chilling question whispered through her mind. Did she truly want to understand what that truth entailed? Jess could hardly breathe, her pulse pounding in her ears like the relentless drumbeat of impending doom. She didn't take her eyes off the mirror, its dark surface undulating like oil, reflecting flickers of her deepest fears, images of loss, betrayal, and suffocating darkness. The shadows around them twitched in anticipation, hissing softly, as if inviting her to complete the terrifying picture. "We need to break the glass," Kyle urged, his face pale with terror. "We can't let them in." But who was them? Were the feral ones behind the mirror, or was it something worse, something lurking in her own mind? The air thickened, pressing against her chest. "What if it's a trap?" she whispered. Each flickering reflection seemed to pull her closer, taunting her with promises of truth. Could this mirror hold answers to their escape, or would it further ensnare them? "Step closer," the shadows echoed, their voices a magnetic lure, twisting through her sanity. "Let the truth be known." "Shut up," Jess shouted, shaking her head violently as if to dislodge the whispers. She grasped Kyle's hand tightly, her nails digging into his skin. They were still there, united, but barely anchored against the rising tide of despair. Kyle's voice trembled, eyes darting between the mirror and her. It was as if he was battling against some unseen force. I can feel them pulling at me. Don't let go. She glanced at him, desperation flickering in his gaze. Don't let them win, she urged, tightening her grip around his hand. Remember why we started this, remember who we are. Just as they dug deeper into their resolve, a loud shatter echoed, vibrating through the room. A crack splintered the mirror, jagged and dark, spilling thick shadows that slithered across the floor like venomous snakes. Around them, the air became electric, vibrating with a palpable energy, a prelude to the darkness about to descend. Surrender, the whisper remained, now louder and more insistent. The shadows surged forward, a wall of chaos that threatened to engulf them. Back! Jess cried, instinctively putting herself between Kyle and the relentless wave. In that moment, she thought of their childhood, of the warmth of summer days, and the laughter shared as they played beneath a bright sun. Just like that sunny afternoon, light could pierce through this growing darkness. Fight, Kyle. We are more than this darkness. But moments before despair took complete hold, a pulse of light erupted from the cracks, radiating outward in a frenzied burst. The dark forms reeled back, screeching in protest, their shadows splintering. With a rush of adrenaline, Jess propelled forward, driving her shoulder into the mirror, ready to shatter it completely. The moment met them with violent resistance. A vortex of pain surged through her, pulling her in. Kyle! She screamed as the mirror began to fracture more, and they were edged closer to the precipice of the unknown. Then, the shadows returned, rushing at her, whispering promises of freedom in exchange for surrender. Join us. They pleaded, voices sweet and silky, yet dripping with malice. No more struggle, no. Jess shouted, feeling her grip on reality loosening. But instead of fear, she felt anger rising. You're not me. You are nothing. With one final push, their hands connected again, the energy between them sparking a defiance that filled the room. Let us finish this. They would not become prey to the darkness. They were warriors, bound by a history that couldn't be extinguished. As they leaned back into the chaos, together, they shattered the mirror, plunging into an explosion of color and light that blinded them both. But just as they thought they were free, they were thrown into a void unreal and endless, suspended in nothingness. The shadows clung to the edges, curdling and swirling, creating a cacophony of despair. Jess! Kyle shouted, his voice swallowed by the void. What's happening? The swirling darkness filled her vision, and before she could answer, a flicker of an image appeared, flashes of future fears, scenes of them being pulled apart by the encroaching shadows, and with a horrifying realization, Jess understood that this was no escape, it was merely the beginning of another struggle. We have to keep fighting. She screamed, the echoes of her voice lost among the chaos, but what awaited them next? Had they truly entered a new realm, or were they destined to repeat their torment? A chilling thought crept in. What if the feral ones had merely been the prologue? The void swallowed them whole, a cold and oppressive silence wrapped around Jess like a shroud. She felt Kyle next to her, the warmth of his body a small comfort against the chilling nothingness. Yet, even that felt tenuous. Jess, I can't see anything. His words echoed into the infinite dark, a desperate plea that sent a shiver coursing through her. Hold on to me. She yelled, the panic rising. Just stay close. But as she spoke, tendrils of darkness writhed around them, beckoning with icy fingers. They slithered and coiled, pressing against her skin like a million whispering mouths. Surrender, they hissed. Embrace what you truly are. A flicker of defiance ignited within Jess. We won't give in. She mentally screamed at the shadows, willing them to retreat. She focused on the bond she shared with Kyle, their laughter, adventures, and the hope of freedom they chased for so long. Suddenly, a spectral light flickered in the distance, barely more than a pinprick, but it pulsed with an undeniable force. Instinctively, Jess reached out, both terrified and hopeful, feeling almost hypnotized by the glow. There. She pointed, propelled toward it. As they began to move, the darkness hissed louder, swirling around them fiercely. You can't escape. It screeched. The shadows tightened their grip, clawing at Jess's arms, sharp and unyielding. She could feel Kyle's desperation growing, and she held on tighter. I won't let go. She vowed, the strength of her conviction pushing against the encroaching night. Each step felt like wading through molasses, but the light remained a beacon. It shimmered with promises of safety and answers, maybe even a way out. Then, suddenly, the darkness shifted. A figure loomed just beyond the edge of the light, a twisted silhouette with familiar, haunting features. It stepped into the glow, and Jess gasped. Jess Kyle, it murmured, the voice dripping with mock concern. It was her own reflection, twisted and grotesque, a warped version of her human self. You think you can escape yourselves? We are who you fear, your true nature. Join us. No. Jess shouted, shaking her head violently. You're not real. Get away from us. But the figure drew closer, eyes glinting with malice. Embrace the darkness, the freedom it offers, your true power lies here. Kyle's breathing quickened, and panic danced across his face. Jess, please, what is that? Don't listen. The shadows surged forward, forming a massive tide, and all around them, whispers escalated into a haunting choir. Join us, the bright light flickered now, flickering like a dying star, and doubt crept into Jess's heart. Were they truly warriors, or was this a desperate fight against an inevitable fate? Thoughts spiraled, pulling at her resolve. The darkness felt overwhelming, an entity as intoxicating as it was terrifying. Jess. Kyle's voice sliced through the hum of chaos. We can't listen to them. We're stronger together. Remember, in that moment of clarity, Jess clutched his hand tighter, feeling the familiar warmth seep into her. Together, she whispered fiercely, just as shadows clawed at her, she pushed ahead, mustering all her strength. Jess turned toward the figure that mirrored her fears. You don't define me. I choose to fight. We both do. With renewed resolve, they rushed forward, throwing themselves toward the light, ready to break through the suffocating darkness, ready to confront the twisted version of what they had feared all along, but the darkness roared back, swirling violently, reaching for them with desperate grasp. As Jess poured her will into the light, it pushed back, the shadows boiling over, howling in anger, then suddenly, everything went white. A blinding flash exploded around them, the screams swirling into silence, and when the light dimmed, they found themselves somewhere else entirely. The air felt different, heavy and damp, the warm glow of sunlight a mere echo. They were in an empty field, the sky painted in sinister shades of gray. No sign of escape, just the eerie hum of tension. Where are we? Kyle whispered, scanning the desolate landscape. Jess's heart pounded. I don't know, but it feels wrong. Almost alive. Then, distant shadows began to form on the horizon, creeping closer with unnatural speed. Fear wrapped its fingers around her throat. Kyle, we need to move. Now. But as they turned to run, Jess's gut twisted with disbelief. They were not just being hunted, they were in the midst of a new beginning, one that threatened to pull them back into the very darkness they had fled. Would they find a way out this time? Or was this their new reality? The shadows welcomed them, whispering promises of new terror just beyond the reach of the light. What had they truly unleashed? Jess's heart thundered against her rib cage as she felt the shadows creeping closer, tendrils of darkness reaching for them. Each incoherent whisper wrapped around her mind, thrumming with an ominous promise of despair. She could sense Kyle's panic rising, his grip on her hand tightening. This can't be the end, she thought, desperately trying to weave a thread of hope in the suffocating atmosphere. Stay strong. She yelled over the cacophony of voices. We can't let them win. But the shadows pressed in, their hunger palpable and intoxicating. The air felt thick and damp, heavy with an expectation that threatened to swallow them whole. Jess glanced back, her gaze scanning the horizon. Distant figures slithered closer, forming grotesque shapes that danced just out of sight. The fear gripping her tightened, but she clenched her jaw and pushed forward. With each step, echoes of joy and laughter fought to break through the despair that hung heavily between them. "Remember us, Kyle," she urged, pulling him along. "Remember our summer nights, our dreams." His eyes flickered with uncertainty, reluctant hope sparking within. "Jess!" he shouted, breaking through the oppressive murmur. "I'm with you. Just, don't let go." A wild roar erupted from the shadows, shaking the ground beneath them, a reminder of the darkness they fled. But Jess stood firm, eyes blazing. "I choose light. I choose us." The apparitions hissed back, swirling around them, desperate to sabotage their bond. "You will never escape," they crooned, their voices layering over one another, blending like venom on a blade. "You crave what we offer. Liar!" she screamed, her voice slicing through the darkness. "You can't take what isn't yours." Jess squeezed Kyle's hand, a jolt of energy radiating between them, fueling her conviction. And then light. A shimmering glow erupted from their clasped hands, illuminating the encroaching shadows. The darkness recoiled in fury, but Jess didn't waver. "Together, Kyle. Remember," she cried, guiding them toward the flickering beacon of hope. They ran, a riot of determined strength propelling them forward, pushing past the broken paths of their fears. The ground trembled as they surged ahead, racing toward the horizon where the light danced, beckoning them closer. "Don't look back," Jess insisted, igniting the fire of their will to escape. Suddenly, the ground cracked beneath them, fissures opening like howling mouths. Jess felt the sharp edges of reality bending and twisting, but rather than fear, determination surged through her veins. "We won't let it end like this," she shouted, anchoring Kyle. Lightning flared overhead and then it hit them, a merge of darkness and blinding light forcing them apart. "No!" Jess cried, the chaos swirling, pulling her down into a void. But then solid warmth surged through her. Kyle's voice cut through the maelstrom. "Jess! Focus on me. Find me." With grit teeth, she committed to that voice, honing her vision on the light that pulsed almost within reach. "Hold on," she shouted, desperately straining toward him. In an instant, she was back, the shadows dissipating as the light expanded outward in a blinding glow that shook the very core of the dark. The cacophony of whispers faded into haunting echoes, overwhelmed by laughter and sunlight exploding across the plain. When the light dimmed, they stood on solid ground, hand in hand, in a beautiful meadow dominated by wildflowers and bright skies. The shadows that had plagued them now retreated, mere memories of the nightmare that felt distant yet scarily close. "What just happened?" Kyle breathed, glancing around in disbelief. "Is it over?" "I don't know," Jess replied, heart still racing, scanning the vibrant landscape. "But we're free?" As they cautiously wandered through the meadow, the flowers swaying gently under a breeze, whispers appeared soft yet lingering, a reminder of what they had conquered. The feral ones may have retreated, but their presence, a shadow of a dark promise that today was merely the beginning, and ahead in the distance, there lingered a vast tree, ancient and gnarled. Something about it felt significant, as if it held stories of their struggle and unspoken connection to the wild darkness they had encountered. "I feel it too," Kyle nodded, his expression shifting to determination. "Maybe that tree can give us answers. We can find a way to protect ourselves." Together they walked toward that tree, openness blossoming within their hearts, courage flowing at their sides. The shadows around them hindered, but Jess knew they had taken the first step away from the brink of despair. "Whatever awaits us next, we face it together," she said, looking at Kyle, a warm smile breaking through the fear. "Always," he replied, the bond between them stronger than any darkness lurking at the edges of their thoughts, ready to shield them from the unknown. A promise echoed in the air. Their journey was far from over, but they would fight together for every moment they cherished and every chance at freedom they grasped. With intertwined hands, they moved forward, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. Now, dear friends, this is the moment to show your support. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories that await. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and keep the magic alive. Flood that comment section with your reactions and theories about the ending. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to be part of the community that champions these tales, so let us keep this adventure rolling.